All right, podcast has started. The Coach JL podcast, Football and Life. Today, an episode with Simon Whitehead, and it's the live part of the Football and Life podcast. Simon Whitehead, you are an economist, and we're talking about inflation today. How you doing,
Yes,
buddy?
so that's going to be the topic. I guess the life part this time, but there's been plenty of football between us in the past. So, football's brought us together, right? So,
That's it. Yeah. So I don't know if you watched some episodes, but that's my first question, Simon, right? When do we meet for the first time?
I think that we met in 2014 at an Australian Outback camp, I believe, prior to the 2015 World Cup. I think we were in Sydney for a weekend with 120 other people, I think, from memory. So it was a busy weekend, but yeah.
120 of our best friends, right? Yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah.
So that was my first thought, that it was an Outback camp. Couldn't quite think that 2014 in preparation to the 2015 World Championships. That's what I was thinking myself. Or was there I came down to Adelaide, I thought prior to that, for a camp for the state team.
Yeah, so
Um,
I would have been a junior at that time, so I wouldn't have been in that. I saw
okay.
I did think about that, and I was like, oh, I can't remember if there'd been any contact prior to that. Obviously,
Yeah.
it wasn't any real meaningful conversation if we don't remember it, but definitely remember the World Cup training
Yeah,
camp. So
yeah,
that's
yeah.
for
Oh
sure.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So was it at the SAS when we had the camp?
We
Because
were
I can't
out.
remember that. Like,
We were out like where the Manly Sea Eagles were training in, like that forest
yeah, yeah. That's
area with a couple of.
the Sydney Academy of
Mm,
Sports. That's
yeah,
what
there
it
we
is.
go.
Yeah,
There we
yeah.
go.
I,
I'd played junior state there previously, and it rained like anything, and the field was terrible. So when it said it was going to be there, I was like, oh no, I've got pretty average memories of that place. But then that weekend was a good weekend. So
yeah. So Simon Whitehead is I'm thinking former quarterback,
yep,
right?
former.
Yeah, not playing
No,
anymore. So for the quarterback, former Outback national team player,
yep,
and current state team offensive coordinator in South Australia.
yep.
Yeah. And then you are an economist. So when I reached out on Facebook, I said, like, I'm looking for somebody, an economist who can talk to me about inflation. And you popped your hand up, so yeah, that's me. And then prior to this, what was it? A couple of weeks before, we met, randomly at the state team between South Australia and Victoria for the junior state team.
Yeah, it was unexpected meeting, but a pleasant one at that. I was pretty happy. Those state games. You get the work in, you play the game. It's always competitive, but then after, it's all about building friendships, seeing people you haven't seen in a while.
Mm.
And so yeah, when I looked across the field and saw you there, I was like, oh, I haven't. What it be? Probably since the 2015 World Cup that we've seen each other, so
I'm pretty
eight
sure.
years. So
Mm, yeah.
yeah, it was great. And then yeah, just scrolling through Facebook and saw you say, "Hey, I need an economist." I was like, "What are the chances that I'd
Yeah,
seen you two weeks earlier, and now here you are?" And I'm like, "That's my job." I was like, "Here I am." So
yeah,
it's worked out well, I think. So
yeah. So what's harder? What's more difficult? Playing quarterback for the Outback or being an economist?
oh, definitely easily playing quarterback for Outback. There's only one or two of them every 4 years. There's
Yeah.
economists roll through the streets, especially in the US. There's plenty of them, so it's not too
Correct.
difficult to do that. So it's
Yeah,
about the same time period though, about 4 years. 4 years to become an economist.
yeah, 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 yeah,
Four
yeah,
4 years in theory to be Outback quarterback. So
yeah. What So what do you have to do? So you have to go to university. I take it. What do you?
yeah.
What's the process there?
Yeah, so I mean, the economist field is quite wide. and takes in lots of people. But the usual route, the route that I took, is studying economics at university. So you study a combination of micro and macroeconomics in your 4-year degree, and then from there you have all the skill sets to sort of become a graduate economist and to start working. But that's not to say that you can't, like, there are a few of my friends that took a lot of economics courses that have computer science majors or have pure math majors and things like that, and they're more than qualified to also become an economist. So it's sort of, an economist is more about the way you use the skills that you learned in college, rather than learning specific things.
Yeah. So you mentioned sort of, like there's a lot of information now, right? That you have to,
Oh yeah,
read and catch up on. There's a lot of stats then as well, right? So that's
yeah.
something that football and then economists have in
Oh yeah, love of numbers. Love of numbers is
yeah.
always something. The other thing that I like is the precision that sometimes is required for economics. There's sometimes a very unique and precise way to deal with something, and I think that's another crossover with football. So I like to try and keep those crossovers constant in my life. I guess that there's the interplay between everything that I do. So.
Right. Well, that warms my heart because, and then, I don't think that I'm the only one who does that, but that football and life just is intertwined and it's just works together for me. Everything is
Oh
like
yeah.
that for me.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it all just depends on how you see the world. But for me, it's football. I was always taught to be on time and to be ready to go and things like that. With work, any sort of job, you show up on time, you're ready to go, you're accountable for what you're doing. These are life lessons that work on the football field, and you can get taught. And I was taught at an early age, and that then have been able to carry through.
Mm, mm. So, 4 years of university.
Yep.
What's some of the sort of the courses that you have to, like, what you said, the macro and
Micro and
micro.
macro. So
No.
micro is a study of sort of a closed, sort of small system or a marketplace. So typically when that's taught between two companies, one that produces one object and one that produces another, and sort of the interplay between them. And then you can obviously add in more companies, and then you get different elements of the marketplace. And then macro economics is all about the macro being big. So it's all about the greater, so a world look, a country to country look, things like that. So they're sort of two of the core courses. And then you have sort of specializations off of that. So you'll have public economics or environment and resource economics or econometrics if you're looking at the statistics sort of thing, which is not everyone's cup of tea, but I really enjoy it. So so there's all these wide basket that makes an economist, or in your economics degree.
What university did you go to?
So I graduated from Pacific Lutheran University, which is a university in Seattle, about an hour south of Seattle in Washington State, up in the northwest corner.
Okay. And so is that then when you study math anywhere in the world, the math is going to be the same, right? When economics, when is that different from country to country or region to region? How you study it, or because obviously you work in Australia right now,
Mm-hmm. I think the one of the major differences, and it's a trick for people who haven't done it before, is that Maths 1 in Australia is vastly different from Maths 1 in the US, because obviously each university caters to what they anticipate the person coming out of high school knowing. And so in that sense, if a school or a country thinks that they have a higher math level in high school, then their Maths 1 might be slightly higher level than the Maths 1 in a different country. And then further to that, some people I guess you have your core subjects at university, and across the country, sometimes math is included in that for economics, and sometimes it isn't. So it's all there's a wide variety of what your core foundation of being an economist is rests upon. So I did probably fairly little maths in the US, but then since coming back here, maths is a large part of my role. So
Okay. Yeah. Also, talking about your role, what is the job title and the job description that you have?
yeah, so I work as an economist for the South Australian government. So I work for a little offshoot of the Treasury Department called the Essential Services Commission. My job focuses on price regulation of monopoly businesses that provide essential services in South Australia. So it's
Okay.
very, very small, niche little
Yeah.
pocket, but it some of the decisions that we make have large impacts on customers statewide. So it's an important job. Oh, I tell myself that.
Well, well, it's well, at least it's important to you. Then
Oh, well, it's not just important to me. I mean,
yeah.
we help set the revenue for SA Water, who's the water provider for 800,000 families in South Australia. So
Mhm.
setting how much they can recover, and by that sort of what the cost level is, I think is an important part of living, that everyone can afford water and that they're not overpaying for something like that. So
All right. Hmm. All right. So that's the generalities of this, right? To the core of this podcast,
yes,
inflation.
yes.
Right. Now, what is it? And when I'm asking what is it, explain it to me like I'm a 4-year-old.
Okay, we're going all the way down. So
Yeah.
the basic definition is that inflation is the rate at which prices for goods or services are rising, and from that, the purchasing power that a person has is declining over time. So it's all about what. So if you go into a grocery store and you want to buy a loaf of bread, about 20, 30 years ago would have cost you $1, and now it costs you $3. And so over those 20 years, slowly over time, the price has increased as either production of it has become more expensive, or inputs of it have become more expensive, or people there's more demand for it. So that's really what it is at its core, is that if you had $5 50 years ago and $5 now, the purchasing power of that $5 is vastly different.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's due to the phenomenon of inflation.
Yeah. So, in my 4-year-old brain, inflation is I think I read it as is used if it goes quickly. The price rises go quickly.
So that's when it gets into the news,
Yeah.
yes. But
Yeah.
inflation as a whole is any price rise.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so typically there's what's called good inflation, which is between sort of 2 to 3%, which is where people think that they expect it to continue at that rate, and so then businesses make decisions. But that's good. But so prices are always slowly increasing. It only makes the news when it gets above the 5, and people start to noticeably see the difference when you walk into the grocery store, and everything is substantially higher.
Yeah. So, I'm a recovering addict, Simon.
Mm-hmm.
I'm addicted
Yeah.
to Pepsi Max.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you
So
were addicted, right? Because you're
yeah,
recovering. You've kicked it.
it's an ongoing struggle. I'm telling you, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I could buy a 2-liter bottle for
Yep.
a while ago for 180. Okay.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden it goes from 180, and then the very next day it's $2. And
Yep.
this is before inflation got into the news, right? So I'm going,
Yep.
oh, so 20 cents, that, like I haven't done a math in my head, but 20 cents is a substantial price increase if the product is 180, right? It's like,
Yep.
I'm like, so where does this come from? And now I think now it's that same bottle is now $2.40 or something like that.
Yep.
So there is a price increase. That's the so what is that? So when salaries you have a yearly increase in your salary because of
Yep.
the cost of living, right?
Yep.
That's keeping up. What is that? There's like an abbreviation for it. What is that?
Cost of living.
Yeah, yeah, the
Oh, you're
like
talking about the CPI index?
CPI. Yeah, yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep.
So
The consumer price index. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. So
so
the consumer price index is a proxy and a way that people assess inflation and the changes that it's making. And it's slightly different to what cost of living is, but they intertwine together, I guess. So your CPI tries to measure, it has a defined basket of goods, and it says how much did this basket of goods cost yesterday? How much does it cost a month ago? How much did it cost a year ago? And that's sort of what the percentage CPI number is that you'll hear. And then the cost of living is really more about how much you spend on your basket of goods individually to maintain your living standard. So for you, if you buy 3 bottles of Pepsi Max a week and it costs you $7, and then the next week or 2 years later, you still want to buy those same 3 bottles, but it now costs you $8, then there's that $1 cost of living change.
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah. So and then where does inflation come from? So I've obviously, you hear and you read stuff and you're like, all right, so there is so many different factors, that's kind of difficult for me to it's not difficult to understand. I understand it, but it feels to me like there is nobody that actually can pinpoint or know exactly what's going on. It's not this, it's not an exact science. Let's say that. Am
I
I
guess
right in thinking?
well, it's very difficult because the economy is so large, right? And inflation in Australia is dependent on inter-country trade as well, and they have their own inflation. So there's thousands of things that are all intertwining together that can sort of cause inflation. And usually some of them work together and things like that. And so then you can sort of have a more defined idea for what exactly is the cause of inflation. But sort of there's the typical cause, and the one that we usually see is an increase in the money supply of a country. And so that sort of happens or happened recently, if we look at recent time, with governments handing out COVID subsidies to try and keep the economy going. People were still earning their same wage, or a lot of Australians were. And so then they were able to save a lot of money, and they weren't buying anything because shops were shut, restaurants were shut, you couldn't travel places, things like that. So these large chunks of demand that the economy would call was completely wiped out for a couple of years. And then as it was turned back on, there was a really high demand for this, and that caused prices to kind of rise a little bit because businesses were inundated with demand for their services of flights, things like that, and as people were spending all of this money. So that's sort of the main way, or the most common way, I think, that it's happened in history for us there. So that's what's called demand side inflation.
Well, so if I hear that, right, demand, so there's the supply and demand, right? That's it. There's a
Yep.
high demand, people can charge more. Okay, so
Yep.
but if it was that simple, why don't we say, look, people in Australia, where we got 22 million people, we say, look,
Yep.
keep your money in your pockets, right? When we
Yep.
do that for X amount of time, and there
Yep.
is no demand, is then inflation, is then the prices going down? Because if it was that simple, that would be a very easy solution, wouldn't it?
So that's essentially what happened during COVID, right? When
Yeah.
all the services weren't happening and people weren't able to spend their money, the prices of things slowly came down. And so I think in there, from some of the statistics that have been posted out there, there was some negative inflation there. So where the prices were dropping slowly. And then from there, everyone was able to go back on because of the policy decision that COVID was done once you got your vaccine. And so then with those historically lower prices and this build-up of cash that everyone had, they went, hey, look at this. I have no problems at all. Now, if we were able to reel that back in, which is what the central bank's trying to do by raising interest rates, is to make customers go, oh, I actually have to spend more on housing. I'm slightly uncertain about what the future holds for how much my mortgage increases by, how much, my groceries and my bills increase by, that then they stop that discretionary spending on holidays or cars or white goods or clothes or just anything in the economy, right? And so that's sort of the plan, is to try and temper it. Now, the goal that the bank has is to try and not crush it all at once, like you're sort of suggesting, right? If you crush it all at once, then we go into a recession, people lose their jobs, things like that. Then that's not good for anyone. So the idea is to slowly temper it down so that you can maintain the most amount of jobs in the economy while still lowering the price increases that we're seeing.
Yeah. So by having it regulated in terms of interest rates,
Yep.
it doesn't crash, and therefore the opposite of what we want, it doesn't happen.
Yeah. So the Reserve Bank has the ability, a year ago to say interest rates are now 5% from 0%, and that would have created that shock ripple, in theory, the shock ripple through the economy, that everyone would have stopped spending money almost instantly. They would have gone, oh, I have no idea what's going. But in terms of long-term planning, it's pretty bad for businesses, because now they have to, in the back of their head, always think, oh, that could happen again. How do we plan for that? Things like that. So the reason for the sort of slow incremental jumps down is to slowly temper people to go, okay, I'm adapting to new business conditions slowly. I have some period of time with which to make those adjustments so that I can keep as many people employed, keep producing as much of the stuff that I am, those sorts of things, to keep the economy moving, ticking over, but not too fast. It's very, very fine problem that they've got here. So
yeah. Now, so do you have any idea what percentage of the Australian population has a mortgage or has their own property? And
no, I do not know that off the top of my head, but there's plenty of news articles out there that are sort of talking about there being, sort of hundreds, 200, 300,000 people that have bought in the last 2 years that are on those fixed rates that are then going to jump onto the variable. And I think that also has another effect of lowering down the demand pretty harshly. But yeah, I mean, in terms of mortgages, it's hard to sell. You have plenty of investors out there, mum and dad investors that have a unit or an apartment on the side or a house. You have plenty of people that have this generational wealth built up in their family, in their house in particular, because of how house prices have risen, that they have this house that's been in their family for their whole life. And so there's no mortgage on a lot of those and things like that. So there's this fine interplay between it, which makes the interest rates a very broad brush. The number one, the ideal solution, if we could, would be to have something printed on everyone's forehead of, this is how much money you're allowed to spend every week, and to try and lower sort of that discretion, because the government doesn't have that ability to individualize each person. They have to make a broad economy decision.
Yeah, so that's something I was just thinking about there when you brought that up as well. Is that because this is where we're going with this interest rate. All right, so if you don't own a house,
Yep.
you generally just pay rent, right?
Yep.
Now, I'm not a renter, so I don't know how this works really. But so if you do those rents go up, with the increase, is it like, can they do it like that as well? So it's not only the people that have a mortgage that feel it, but
Yeah, so
the
the
people who are
way
renting.
that it usually works with rents, and I'm renting at the moment, so have gone through this process, is that you sign your 12-month lease, and so over the course of the 12 months, the landlord or the owner of the property feels those rent increases and they slowly build. And so when your lease ends, there's often a time where the landlord goes, well, now I need to make, this extra buffer on what I was already charging you. And so then, and this is where the stories in the news, which are really bad, of people's rents jumping 10, 20% up, is because the underlying cost of the borrowing for the landlord has also increased. So
Yeah,
it's not necessarily, and could be isolated, but it's not necessarily that landlords are trying to make a killing. It's more that, if they could, they would raise your rent every month with the interest rate rises that they feel, but that's not an
yeah,
option that they have. And so
mm,
instead, it's at the end of the lease, they go, okay, well, this is what I think's happening.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, so that brings me to our next question. Really, is that so? What we do here is that these big companies making record profits. That where you go, okay, so record profits. That's more than the increase, price increases that maybe should be because of the inflation. How does that regulate it? Or because you said something about the water in SA there
Yep.
earlier.
Yeah, so the water in SA is a highly regulated component, and that stops anything above efficient costs being passed through, and anything above inflation being passed through to customers in South Australia. That's the one of the core facts of what you do with economic regulation. But when you're out there in the marketplace, in the competitive market, say if we talk about like airlines, for instance, if you're buying a flight from Adelaide to Melbourne, your cost could have been around $160 pre-COVID, even during COVID, but now they're more at 220, 230. And some of that is, like I said, the demand that there's just more people that want to make that flight from Adelaide to Melbourne. And this sort of helps build this story of companies having record profits. It's just because they're just selling more seats on the plane.
Yeah, yeah,
Where their plane might have been 80% full, now because a family goes, oh, remember that trip we didn't take to Melbourne because COVID ruined it? Well, now I'm going to take that trip. And so now the plane's actually 80, 90% full. And so that way, some businesses have been able to grow those sort of profits on top of it. There's been other things happening as well. If we talk in the mining sector, a lot of these mining companies have seen the price of the commodity that they mine absolutely skyrocket since COVID because of demand for the final good past that commodity has increased. And so because of that, their costs haven't actually changed too much, but what they're able to sell their goods for has
mm,
risen extremely high. And so they've been able to do that. But the same happens is that commodity prices fluctuate heavily all the time. And so that, it can be hard for them to track how much they want to produce, what costs they want to take, what further investment they want over time because of how volatile, some of these commodity prices can be. Think of, oil prices go from $60 a barrel up to 100. So that's a 40, 50% increase there. If you were uncertain about what you could sell something for, you sort of hesitate with where you're going to produce something. So
yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah.
sort of
Hmm.
how some of these big companies have been able to make record profits. Is probably because the year prior during COVID they didn't make much at all, right?
Mm.
And so it's sort of that 18-month, 2-year period that they've now crammed into 1 year in terms of selling things, buying things, being able to produce things, that all of a sudden every company's making a large amount of money.
Yeah, yeah, and it's the, I guess what, the average person, looking at myself, the 4-year old's brain, is that when you, like, in the supermarket, there's a product, and there's the chain that gets you from whatever material it is in the beginning to the final product. There's so many different stages where
Oh, yeah.
everybody can put their, extra few cents or whatever it is on, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's that production where everyone goes, oh, I have to pay my worker an extra dollar. They make this many of this item an hour, so I have to spread that over the cost of all those, even just to break even again. And then you do a little bit more because you want to, continue your profit making and things like that. But then,
Mm.
prices can balloon very quickly. And the more steps along the path there are, the more there is for, these wage changes and things like that to then increment the price up higher and higher. So things like Pepsi Max, the people making the bottles want to make a little bit more. The people actually making the drink itself want to make a little bit more. The difficulty of driving and transporting it around Australia and around the world during COVID was higher. And so people had to pay slightly extra for that. And so then, all these things sort of feed into each other.
Yeah. So back in the day when I was so really young, my grandparents used to talk to me about, how some candy or whatever, it's like 1 cent. Like,
Yep.
Simon,
Yep.
that's the smallest, price you can pay for something, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, and it was like, oh, this costs this much now, and those numbers have obviously gone up through the years,
Yep.
as has my age, right? um so it is always, prices will always go up. And I remember, history lessons in school where inflation, like in Germany through the Second World War, is like they just added all these zeros on bills, and you can still find them at places where, um how do you project that going in the future? Prices are always gonna go up, right? So do we just have to constantly be ready for to read, like, all right, now my bottle is $3, for two, so is that just fact of life? Prices will just always continue to rise?
Well, it's not necessarily a fact of life that prices continue to rise. There are certain other things in there that can, that can change the way that things are produced. I think of there's production and technology factors that come into it that could always lower costs and things like that. That could see the base cost of lots of goods change and to lower down. You think of self-driving cars or something like that that will lower the cost of Ubers and taxis and things like that. You have self-driving buses that run on electric power. We're talking in the future, I guess, like we're out there now. But the price of public transport could decrease if you've got a self-driving bus that's powered on solar panels that's on its roof. All of a sudden, you don't need to pay $5 per ticket. You can pay $1, and things like that. So there could be some strides forward that bring prices down. But I guess that, when you look back at historically, you think, 20, 30 years ago, what the average wage was now and what the average wage is now, that it is slowly building. And that, yes, there could be a time where, a bottle of Coke is now $4 and you're like, oh my goodness. Like, I remember back in my day when it was $2.40, and your kid's going to be like, oh, there's no way that it was ever that cheap,
That's
so
nuts.
pretty much, right? And then you just keep going back. So just, the 2-3% over time slowly builds and it's 5 cents a year here, 5 cents a year there. All of a sudden it's very easy to go from $2 up to $2.30, $2.40, especially if you have a spike like we have in the last sort of 2 years.
So looking forward, right? So with your just economist hat on, how long does these things just last, or how fast does it go up? How fast does it go down? What can we expect going forward?
So there's this key in there that's about persistent inflation, and this is one of the Reserve Bank or a central banker's worst nightmare, which is where people believe that inflation is going to last for a long time, and all of a sudden you build that into your expectations of how you act. So a lot of how inflation lasts post the peak, which is sort of where we are here, according to data that's been posted, is that it all really just depends on how consumers act and behave going into the forward. You know, if like you say, more people start turning off their spending and things like that, and start saving slightly more, that it could lower at a faster rate. I guess the Reserve Bank, I think, has posted out that they think it's going to be mid to late 2025 before it comes back down to their 2 to 3% sort of band, which is, you know, still a little bit away, but that also depends on so many customer decisions along the way, so many banking decisions along the way, the whole economy functioning, you know, as they forecasted to sort of get to 2025. So, you know, and they get surprised all the time by how consumers react. And, you know, once all these people come off of their fixed interest rates onto the variable ones, and we see more people's disposable incomes shrink, you know, there could be a real contraction, and we could be done in, you know, a year's time rather than 2 years' time, and we could need to start cutting rates because, you know, the economy is crashing, and we need to spur it in again to try and get back to 2 to 3%. So there's all these factors moving forward, but I think that, you know, it won't be done by the end of the year. I can guarantee that one. How about that?
All right.
As my thought only, you know, that's not there's not much numbers or anything behind that, but I think that, you know, what we've seen in the past is that, you know, we haven't quite come off of the rates enough, and there hasn't quite been enough discretionary spending stopping, and so that'll sort of continue for a little bit longer, I think.
Yeah. So all in all, so there are so many factors that it's is the interest rates, is that the sort of the major way there is a you know, not global but national restriction, you know, for everybody? Is that sort of the kind of the way it goes? And because there's so many different other factors that you can't control.
Oh yeah, so the inflation is mainly tried to control by the central bank with their interest rate lever of their lending out to banks, their overnight rate, and so that sort of then gets pushed on in through mortgages and in through business loans and things like that, and that's how we slowly curb it that way. The other way that happens a lot is by us, you know, in recessions and to try and spur the economy on, government spending is always a large portion of it. And during inflation times, government spending needs to, you know, retract slightly. And so that's also another way that it's sort of twofold there, that, you know, some government projects might not go ahead that might have if interest rates were lower and they were trying to push the economy along. They see what's happening, and so they try to sort of, you know, they reprioritize their projects accordingly, I guess, to try and not you know, add fuel to the fire that is inflation, while the central bank's trying to do their job too. So
yeah. Now, if you look, I don't know how much time you spend a day on looking to the future kind of stuff, right? And are there ways that, you know, something you think of that would help you or help us regulate certain things better? Like, look at what I'm trying to say here is that, you know, when you have a certain way of doing things, all right, this interest rate, right, that's a good one, all right. Can you think of other things that we're not doing quite actually right now that could be something in the future?
Not particularly, I guess. At my level, first of all, I'm definitely not at the forefront of inflation thinking and policy setting in that mind and regard. But I think that, you know, apart from my sort of out there silly suggestion earlier of having it down to the individual and regulating each individual what they can spend every week, which is a long leap from where we are now, right? That apart from that sort of real individual best case scenario, that the interest rate policy does work, and that it's just been, it was just held back a little bit by some cloudiness because of the COVID-19 pandemic, that people weren't really sure how the economy was going to react after that. And that's sort of why we've seen this large spike. So, I think prior to that, after the global financial crisis, there was no talk about inflation for, 10, 15 years, right? That was on the back of everyone's mind, and it was happening underneath, and the Reserve Bank was still doing everything that it's doing now. It's just that it wasn't necessarily affecting people as much as. So I think that it comes in this cycle, right, where it goes out of the news. People think that everyone's doing a good job. It goes to the back of lots of people's minds, and that then when something goes wrong, it comes to the forefront. People go, we have to change it, despite it working for a long period of time. So
yeah. That's a good point. Like I'm something has to happen. I feel it too much in my wallet. We need to do something different. Yeah.
But despite the last 10 years, you haven't really felt it in your wallet much. Or the Reserve Bank's been cutting interest rates, and you're like, hey, I've got an extra $20 a week because my mortgage is cheaper or something. You're like, this is really good. It's only when it's going the other way that people are like, nah. Like the Reserve Bank's got it wrong here. So
that's good stuff there, Simon, because those are generally things that when costs go up, or down, there is more a feeling of stuff, than always logical thinking it through, right? But where it's coming from too is that just looking at different things, right? We have a problem. How do we solve this problem? Like we've always done it this way. Well, can we do it in another way? And so people, I tell this story sometimes, but people don't know this, but I invented fire zone coverage. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, it wasn't very good and it wasn't always sound, but I invented it myself because I had a problem that I wanted to solve. Right now, there's generally it's widely known that Dick LeBeau invented the fire zone, right? But separate from him, I did the same thing, and it was like, all right, we need pressure on the quarterback. I don't want to play man-to-man coverage. So you know what? We're going to bring a fifth rusher, but we're playing zone coverage. Now, like I said, it wasn't sound that much, but it was trying to find a different way to get an outcome. And that's where sort of this comes from. The question comes from is like, all right, and then you answer that a little bit as in, it goes well for a long time. But let me thinking, are there people looking at this problem and say, all right, here are some options that we could have in the future that maybe are giving us a better outcome?
Oh yeah, there are. There's people around the world that are all, especially now that it's in the news, are all looking at the mechanisms by which it works, what the underlying factors are. Is there a better way of handling this? I think that question constantly comes through, especially after something goes wrong, right? You see the problem, you go, okay, how can we fix this? And so I sort of think that there are people, there's probably out there a younger version of JL at a university in the US getting his PhD that's thinking, all right, how can we tame inflation better than what it is, as he's living in his small one bedroom apartment eating pizza because that's all he can afford. There's someone out there that's going, this is a real problem. I'm going to be the forefront of thinking of it. And that could happen, anytime. But I think at the moment, the most generally accepted, and it's accepted worldwide, really, the interest rates and the overnight loans that central banks give out to banks is the way by which we're bound to do it at the moment. The Reserve Bank of New Zealand, the Fed in the US, the European Central Board does it. So it's all over. Now, some of them have different philosophies and little bits and pieces that they think of, but generally speaking, the interest rate rising is the way by which we try and fight inflation.
Mm. Yeah, some of while you're explaining that, some of my thoughts go to, we've always done it this way.
Mm-hmm.
Like that sort
Oh
of,
yeah, oh yeah.
yeah,
I mean,
like like so. Obviously, like we've had these interest rate hikes for I don't know how many. Like, was it last month? Was it the first time? It
yeah, I think it was. I think we got to 12. Were there 12 hikes in a row? Or 10?
yeah
10 on
yeah
12 months,
yeah
something like that.
yeah that's I mean so if you're the consumer, right? We don't have. Look, I don't pretend to have any idea. That's why we're doing this podcast about it, right? So, but every month you're like, you hear on the radio, oh, the Reserve Bank, like, oh my God,
Yeah.
again,
Oh yeah.
come on, man, right? Or, is it, can you, because it's always, well, like a quarter base point. Is that how they say it?
Yeah, so that's
A
a
two and a
quarter
half
basis
base
point
points.
is, yeah.
So does it always have to be that? Is there can it be a lower increase over a
Yep.
longer time? Like because it feels to me it's always the same.
Yeah, so there's the 25 basis points or the 0.25 is usually has been the usual mechanism by which it goes up or down. There's been some spikes of 50, and I think even the European Central Board did a 75, which is like a really big chunk. And so this
Yeah.
is them saying, hey, this is a real problem. We want to signal to people that they really need to start slowing down their spending, or we can keep doing this. Like like I said, there's no limit to how many basis points the central bank can put on. If inflation was highly rampant and we're at 50% or something in hyperinflation, the central bank could go, we're at 10, just go straight 10%, and just to try and crush it instantly, I guess, before it gets out of control. So, I mean, the ramifications of going from 0 to 10 through the economy, like I said, would be horrendous. Businesses would fire multiple positions of the same people. They wouldn't be able to plan moving forward for what's going to happen. And that's sort of what the 25 is. The 25 is, hey, we've got a problem. We're signaling to you over a long period of time to go, hey, businesses, consumers, you need to rein in your spending so that we don't have to keep going. Like, we'll only go until we have to. And that's sort of what we've seen with the last month, where the Reserve Bank held, is they've going, all right, well, there's a bit of lag coming through with the fixed rate loans and the variable loans and sort of people spending, and then the data that we can get for people spending. And so they've paused, and then we'll see again in a month's time whether that pause is, we've paused because people have actually started acting on it, or if they're paused and they go, oh, that pause and maybe some of the data in the back shows that it's still a problem, we're going to have to go again to really reinforce that signal to people. So that's sort of the way it happens. And thinking about in the future, going back to your question, is the one of the best ways could be if you get a supercomputer that can handle the data of what's going on in the world. You could see an inflation rate and an interest rate rise that changes daily, but what would that cause for, the everyday you and me, as we go to the grocery store, you go to buy something, all of a sudden it's 30 cents more expensive. And you're like, whoa, what happened? I just picked it up off the shelf there and have walked over here. So I think that's sort of, there's going to be some fine balancing between how fast we want things to happen with what's actually practical for consumers and an economy wide.
Yeah. Because you're into this business, in this material, right? So do you feel like government does enough explaining what happens, the duration, what we can do? Because look, I told you earlier before we started recording, I don't watch the news. I'm trying to stay away from negative stuff. And on the news it's never anything happy happening on the news. So do they do enough to inform everyday people to really give them a better idea of how it works, how we can combat this?
Yeah, I guess that's something. I actually had a email come through the other day talking about how economics is losing its grounding in high schools around Australia, and there's less and less people studying it, things like that. And I go, well, this is over time something that could manifest into even more people not understanding what inflation is and being lost with this. So I think that it's there's always this what how much can you teach in high schools, and what is important, and do they actually absorb it, and how it works moving forward. But I think that the Reserve Bank does a pretty good job of signaling, talking through their decisions in their statement of monetary policy that they make. And if you were just to read one thing about inflation, that one page probably gets you the largest amount of information, generalities, gives you their thoughts of what they think moving forward, and you can look at their forecast table and you go, okay, this is what they think is going to happen moving forward. If you're just looking at one thing. But in terms of the government, they try their best, but again, it's such a wide ranging thing that we've seen that Philip Lowe said, yeah, I don't think interest rates aren't going to raise, and since then they have, and now he's lost his job for it. So it makes it even harder that people don't want to make a concrete statement out there about something that like this, where journalism gets their hands on it, and all of a sudden everyone's reading it and going, I can't believe he said that. Whereas there were lots of other people that said very similar things, and so it's hard, I guess. It's really hard to put a firm statement on it. So
yeah, that's definitely to me how it feels. That you like is look, it's not like I haven't heard all the things before, but it's there is not like I said, like math, right? 2 and 2 equals 4, like just the way it is, right? And that's easy to understand, but there are so many variables in this inflation stuff that you like, oh, come on, is there not a better way to do it? Like, especially again, when you feel it in your wallet, you gotta we gotta come up with something better. It's like,
yeah.
please, like how is it that we still have this and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I like it's something that it is in when you said supercomputer, you go like, all right, think about this AI business that's going on in the world at the moment, right? um there must be in the future, and we can do a follow-up podcast in I don't know how many years from now. They go like, they have found a way to have a better monitor the situation, control it in some other way that helps everybody. I
Oh
don't
yeah,
know.
and I think this is one of the things about AI moving forward, is that it's so unknown, the uses that people are going to find for it, how it's going to help, how it's going to impact our economy, that it's very uncertain moving forward about what's going to change, what are we going to do, things like that. And I think that this goes back to sort of, we've seen this slightly before, but on a lower scale, back with the tech sort of things of phones, mobile phones coming out, smartphones, things like this that have radically changed the way that that people work. And AI is probably slated to do a similar thing moving forward. But yes, when that news article breaks, you'll be probably top 10 people that I'll message about it by then, I think. So
Yeah, like, hey.
I'll be itching to get back on and be like, hey, look at this. We've done this. There's this guy in the US, just like I said,
Yeah,
that came up with it.
yeah. um you know that might be the guy, they call him what, Elon Musk. he's
Yeah,
got
well,
that he's got that
man.
brain power that
If,
uh,
if he put his mind to it, I don't know what outcome we'd come up with, but there'd definitely be
yeah,
something that happens. I think we look at what he's done with Twitter and changed it, and I'm like, that's crazy. I have no idea how that's going to work. But I mean, he must think something, and he's got plenty of smart people thinking for him. So it's like, I
yeah.
guess I'll wait and see what happens with it. But
Mm. Well, I guess in his case is that you can do a lot of things and do them very well. Doesn't mean you will do everything very well. You can
oh
have
yeah,
you create an expectation of, all right, that this everything this guy touches and goes to gold, but at the same time doesn't mean everything is going to be like that, or the how long it takes to turn into gold.
Oh
But
yeah, I mean, you think of most business entrepreneurs. It's not their first business that blows up; it's the 10th, the 15th.
mm,
And they're the same person apart from the mistakes that they've learned along the way. And so, even when you look back at famous inventors and things like that, inventing the light bulb took 1,000 different tries, and he's the
yeah,
same person making the same thing. It's just changing slightly with his knowledge of the mistakes that he's made in the past and what doesn't work. So, I think that we're we'll see, but I don't think it'll be Musk that solves the inflation problem. But if he turned his mind to it, I don't know if it hurts him as much as it hurts other people. He's got plenty of money. I'm not sure. I'm not sure he even sees a grocery bill. I'm sure he doesn't. He has someone doing that for him, I'm sure.
I think so. I guess if you have more money, you can also lose more, right? That's
Oh yeah. I mean, if you're out there doing crazy things with your money, like trying to send people to Mars and stuff like that, you're spending plenty of money, and that could all blow up in an instant, I guess. So, yes, no.
The running this up for Simon is like, I always say this, like in terms of progress, right? If the world back in the day relied on me getting us out of the caves, right, we would still be in caves. we
I mean,
might be playing, huh?
we might be playing football in the caves. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I was saying. We might be
we'll be
playing football in the cave.
We'll be playing Fire Zone in the caves at the back there. No, I think it's that it takes a special few, right? And these are the people that are well known throughout history as the changes that have moved us onto one path or another. And I think that it's it's impossible to see maybe where the next one is. Has Musk already done it with Tesla coming out and the EV car? Other people were doing it, but I think at least in my mind, that when he came out with it and was like, here, look at this fine machine that I've got, looks nice, has all these fancy things, and it's electric. You're like, oh, like electric cars don't just have to be this small little smart car box that looks horrible, in my opinion only, but some people might like it. But then it becomes more mainstream, and that pushes people across. So correct. I think that I probably wouldn't have got us out of the caves either, I don't think. Probably not for me, but you never know.
So any closing statements, Simon, that you say, well, like, look, we've explained it, we talked about it. Anything that we can cap this episode off with?
Oh, I mean, that I think the closing would be is that you see high inflation in NFL salaries, and apart from if you're a running back, and then that's basically it. Is that inflation's always sort of around. The better you understand it, I guess, sort of the better you can deal with it, I guess, or adapt to the conditions that there are. And from that, you just wait and see what everyone else does as a whole, and then eventually we get back down to where we have other things in the news again, other than inflation.
Yeah, I guess that's what it is, right? Is like it's kind of like everybody's doing its part, like, because it's not like me just spending zero money, but everybody just stop spending all the money, so just cut it back somewhat. Okay.
Oh yeah, well, it's you just have to, the best way for an individual to combat it is to try and find returns other than keeping your money as physical cash. You put it in your savings account, you put it in some other sort of investment, and that's sort of the best way to make sure that you're at least holding par with inflation, so that the money that you have doesn't lose the power to buy things in the future. Obviously, I can't give financial advice, so you should do some research yourself. There's been a couple of people in the news. A couple of people in the news recently have got in trouble for that. So Speak to a financial advisor. If you do have any issues with it or want to read and learn more about combating inflation with investments. But yeah, so that sort of is everyone doing their part eventually, whether they're forced to by their mortgage or their rent going up so high that they have no income left over, or if it's by choice, of you're going out and you're like, oh, instead of eating out at a restaurant, I'm going to now cook at home, or making those sorts of decisions that are that eventually lead to demand in the economy going down as a whole.
Yeah. All right, Simon. I'm happy that we were able to bring some football in there at the end.
I mean, I got all the time in the world. If you want to talk football, I got plenty on my mind for that. Football seems to be similar to work, that it's just there's always something new and there's always something going on, but there's always hard work and people that want to do it, and that's what the real joy is, I guess, for football, in terms of in a small state or even small country like Australia, is finding the few that do want to put the work in and doing that. So, and that's sort of where football is, and then work is trying to make sure that everyone pays the right price for water.
Look, if you told me, give me like 3 random jobs and this was one of them, and you say, which one of these 3 is a real job and which one isn't, you're like, all right, they do that. Okay, never thought about it.
Someone's out there doing that. There's Sydney Water, there's the Essential Services Commission of Victoria in Victoria doing it. There's people all over Australia setting water prices. There's the AER setting electricity prices. There's all sorts of people there, and these are the prices that of the essential services that you can't cut back on, right? Or you can cut back on, but you have to at least have the opportunity to spend money on that, on drinking water.
I always try to tell my wife to not spend an hour in the shower.
Yep. Well, like I said, there are some ways to cut back on it, but if you've always spent an hour in the shower, you want to be able to keep that standard of. I still want to be able to afford an hour in the shower in a year's time. So
some of us also want some hot water.
Oh yeah.
Now, this probably will air a little bit later than when this potentially might happen, but Isaac Musalam, he's moved to Victoria, and he's joined the Rangers, right? So and he's asked me if I wanted to come to SA and spend a day coaching football in so he's trying to sort of drum up some people to see if there's some interest. So maybe, hopefully, and it would be on the 20th of August on a Sunday. Maybe we could have a third visit really quick together as well.
Oh yeah.
And then just football.
I'm always down for more football, especially from people visiting interstate. I think that the more exposure that the people of South Australia, the football players, get to coaching that's of a really high level, the better the competition can get. And I did. I actually read the message that Isaac sent this morning.
He's done already. Okay,
yeah, and I was like, oh, here we go. I was going to say we won't have seen each other in 8 years, and now we'll be 3 times in as many months we'll have seen each other. I was like, oh, here we go. I was like, must have been fate or something that's got us happening like this. So,
is the universe trying to tell us something?
Yeah, apparently. I don't know. Maybe that there needs to be a football segment to this as well, rather than just the life segment. That's what the universe is saying.
All right, Simon. I hope that we have a chance on the 20th of August. But we'll see. And thank you very much for your time today. I enjoyed it. It sort of I guess it confirmed the thoughts that I did have about inflation and all that kind of stuff. And in general, I think it's still too difficult for my 4-year-old brain to really comprehend it all. So thank you for your time today, Simon.
No, no worries. Thanks for having me. Like, I mean, it's such a big topic as we've talked about all day that I'm not sure that any 4-year-old could really comprehend it. There are probably some 15, 16-year-olds that are still struggling with basic timetables, yet alone what's causing inflation. So, I
That's
think
it.
that you just keep working at it. The more you can slowly take a couple of bits in every day, build a couple of thoughts, learn something new, just keep going. Soon you'll be the smartest 4-year-old out there, eh?
There you go. Well, that's a life strategy for me, anyways.
Yeah,
To get better every day and learn something every day.
yeah.
So
That's what you're here for the podcast for, isn't it? It's just
that's
learning
that's
more and more about people's football, about life, about
yeah,
everything in general. So
that's
yeah, I
it.
guess that the only thing I have to say is that these are all my thoughts and not my employers. So
Oh yeah,
um,
yeah. Well,
that's
l-
that's
yeah,
a required thing that I have to say. So
yeah.
that comes out. Not that I said too much controversial. I don't think on inflation. It was basically very factual. I think is what we've gone through today. So
Well,
I
it
guess
does
the
say.
I guess
Go on.
the forward thinkingness is always abstract, and that's a very personal
Mm,
thing. And even how long it's going to last. I always defer back to the RBA. They have hundreds of people that are more qualified than I am working
mm,
on it. So if they've got a thought that it's going to be like that, I don't have a better idea of what's going to happen. So
yeah,
they're always the best way to go if you're looking forward, really. So
yeah.
yeah.
I think you know most of us in everyday life we're just living that life, and others have more impact on how we live it than we do ourselves.
Oh, sometimes I
But
definitely
that
think
but
so.
that's kind of stuff.
You have the choice of where you choose to live. Like we talked about earlier, you could want to live in a different country if that suits you better, or if you think that there's elements of their economy or their social life that suits you the way that you want to live better. I guess it's all comes down to you have some personal choices, but then obviously there are some that are controlled by other people that you either get to make the choice to purchase something or not purchase something in this
Yeah.
in this sort of sense, right? So,
Whereas a global impact, that's it, huh? Now,
mhm.
I just there's a few pictures behind me, and I've been talking to some guests on the podcast that are in these pictures as well. And if you can, right
I
here,
mean that one, am I?
yeah, you're right in that one.
Hey, there we go. Made the
Yeah,
made the honor
yeah,
wall. Is that what it is?
yeah, yeah. Well, like, so, when your wife is an interior decorator,
Okay.
designer, then
Yeah.
this just happens. Like,
Yeah.
um, the first time it happened, before we moved back to Australia, it was like I come out of the season, and this is my study, and I
Yeah.
come out of the season, and I went into my study, and like completely changed, and it had a wall with the pictures, and um, this goes back, I guess the oldest picture would be this one here. That's from
Yep.
2000, so that's
Okay.
yeah, 23 years ago, Simon.
Mm-hmm.
That's I don't know. I guess it's good because the alternative of that is not very good. But
No,
anyway,
I mean it's a nice wall, and to have a background is always good. I think it's
yeah,
important in the when you're thinking about the future to not necessarily discard what's happened in the past. Like we've talked about, the past is what makes you who you are, and the person that you are really is
mm,
your upbringing and the people that you've got around you. And so I see on that wall, even in the picture that you highlighted that I'm in, there are some great people in that picture that are
yeah,
just just good people that are out there doing things and changing the world in their little spheres. And that's sort of good. When I look at that picture and think about those people, I'm like, yeah, it's a
yeah,
good bunch of guys, that's for sure.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Good thought there to finish up on, Simon. It's
Mm.
really nice. Yeah, because over the years, like, um, yeah, you meet so many people, and you play with them, you coach with them, all that kind of stuff, and you build these relationships that You have fond memories of what happened, what
Oh,
you
for
did, how
sure.
you did it, yeah, when you did it, where it was, all these things was
Oh yeah.
great. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, and even what's come of it, right? Like everyone from that 2015 World Cup, a lot of people have been able to branch off from that and do some really good things, some really cool things. So I think that's also really good to look at and really fond memories for sure.
Yeah. And the funny thing too is, like, I think it was yesterday or the day before, one of the 2015 World Cup memories popped up on Facebook as well. And
Oh, did
it's
it for you? I was going
yeah,
to say it must be about that sort of time 8 years ago, right?
well,
That you would have
I
been
think it
getting.
was July, so it's past
Yeah.
now, I guess. So
Yeah,
was it?
but you would have had all the media from it and things like that slowly filtering onto your pages and things like that. So
Hmm.
yeah, yeah, it was like about a week ago or so that I saw a couple of photos of that people had taken while we were over there at the camp, and there were just some really good memories of it. So
Yeah, because what it was, we were in Canton there just before the what does that game that was played yesterday?
yeah, the opening game for the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
Yeah, yeah, it's
Yeah.
right. Yeah. So, and then we played, and then they start ripping that stadium apart, right? Remember that?
Yeah.
So it's
Oh yeah.
completely new now.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, it's to host an NFL game, it needs to be just a little bit bigger than it was when we were there. But I mean, for Australian standards, it was still a pretty big stadium. But I guess
Mm,
that the Australian standard is slowly changing and growing as the game grows a bit more. That the stadiums that Australians are playing in front of is slowly growing now with
mm.
those in the US and things like that.
Now, did Isaac say that there was a new league ground in SA to play games?
And you,
Something
oh,
like that.
so they've recently partnered with one of the soccer teams on the outskirts of the city. So now there's like a ground that we played at all last year, and now they're playing at again this year, I believe.
All right.
So just it seems to be new sort of facilities every 2 or 3 years. So I'm not sure that it's a great cycle to be on, but at this point, we really just need a place to play. So
Yeah. Because you always had like a central venue, right, where all the games would
yeah,
take place.
yeah, and
And
we're still continuing that now. I think it's easier with only having the 4 teams, and there only being
oh,
two
yeah,
games a
4.
week. Yeah, and there's only 2 games a weekend. Then it's easy to just have them back to back at the same place, and then it minimises the need for officials for
Sure.
first down markers, things like that. That the state doesn't really have a plethora of.
Is does SA have youth programs?
Yep. So there's 4. Each team has a youth team under 19s, under 18s, under 19s, 9-a-side team comp that
Just
plays.
under 19. Not like, sorry, in Victoria, so we got
Mm,
under 13, under 16, under 19.
yep, under 19s. So it's 14 to 19 is really the age that people play at. So obviously the 14-year-olds
Right.
can get a pretty harsh
Yeah.
learning environment for the first couple of years, should they play much. So it's difficult. But if you didn't have that 14 to 19, not many teams would have a team. If you cut 14 and 15 out, you'd really struggle. But that's not to say that we had so I coached the Chiefs juniors team as well, the offense for that, and they a great bunch of kids. But we had 2 15-year-olds playing that were probably top tier players that'll continue playing for the next 3 or 4 years that are really good. They featured heavily in that game that we played, the under 19 state game. One of them started on both sides of the ball as a 15, 16-year-old. So it's there's some really good talent in South Australia, and it's just about making sure that the league stays around enough so that they can showcase it and keep growing.
Yeah. I think I made some notes on because there was a couple of guys that I saw exactly. SA Sharks. All right.
Hmm.
Um, number 57, number 68, number 70, and number 91. There was four guys that popped up when I watched the
On the
game.
on the offensive line, yep,
I
or defensive line, yep,
I think it was there was I think 57 was a linebacker, and
yep,
then the other ones were offensive line, defensive line from memory.
yep,
Yeah,
yep.
yeah.
Now
The
a couple of
linebacker,
you didn't pick
huh?
up on the DBs. We had what, 4 or 5 picks for the day. It's a bit harsh that none of the DBs got into the notes.
Uh, it's uh yeah. Oh, look. So there are some skills that are required to make an interception. Um,
Yeah,
for sure.
but
But
no, no,
I
no.
said these guys stood out. But
Yeah.
um, I think it was a size and
Hmm.
athleticism,
Yeah.
that popped off the screen, so to speak,
Oh yeah.
for me more than just a football skill.
Oh yeah.
But when they
Yeah.
were they were they were bigger and they moved pretty good. I
Yeah.
thought that was yeah.
Oh
There's
yeah.
some future there for these kids if they want
Oh
to.
yeah, and that's the I guess that's the whole point is now to make sure that the league's still around, so that one we can find more of these people, because there's plenty of them in South Australia. I'm sure these talented people that could
Mm,
pick up a knack. Maybe Australian rules and cricket and rugby aren't for them, and gridiron's their pathway to learning things about themselves in life and success,
mm,
and maybe even getting a college degree or something like that. That making sure that the league's around for those people, and then that the league's still functioning at a high quality for the ones that are in it at the moment, to make sure that they can, adequately show their skills, to get recognized, to get then the coaching of, yourself, other international coaches, other coaches Australia wide that are of a high level, so that they can, really push themselves and see how far they can go.
mm, yeah. Um, so obviously Adelaide's not as big a city as Melbourne is.
No.
We have I think 8 teams at the moment
Yeah.
here in Melbourne. So you have four. In
Hmm.
terms of the numbers, right? You have more teams than per capita, so to speak, than we have here.
Yes.
Um, do you feel like that is the four teams there's a good geographical sort of spread and
Well,
coverage of the city
they
that
definitely
works?
spread around and cover the whole city. And then it's we have people. We had a guy on our junior team that drove an hour and 25 minutes for practice every week, and then an hour and 45 minutes to get to the games. So there's some real commitment from people, but there's a good spread around the city. I think that, yeah, like you said, that it's tough in that it's a smaller city, so that registrations or players per capita, or some sort of measure like that, would stack pretty highly. I think the only state would probably be behind would be ACT, because I think they have 3 or 4 teams as well, and have
Mm.
even smaller population. So it'd be interesting to see what we could learn from something like that. Of do we actually have that sort of high level per capita, and how do we how could we get to sort of that ACT level?
There is there is some flag football initiatives going on in the country. That's really good. So part of my job in the NFL Europe in the off season was like football development, and we started actually what we call 5-on-5 school tackle.
Yeah.
Right. I was fortunate enough, like I had a friend of mine who's managing a gym, and part of that business was a guy who imported football equipment,
Yep.
and there was like I think it was like 70 shoulder pads and like hundreds of thigh pads and hip pads and all that kind of stuff. But we had maybe also 40, 50 helmets.
Yep.
So in Amsterdam, there was like a handful of schools. Then it's like, here's the equipment. We're going to go and play 5-on-5 school tackle,
Yep.
which, which is exactly the same rules as 5-on-5 NFL flag, right?
Yep.
We just put helmets and shoulder pads on. So that was a really good way for us to increase numbers. And
Yep.
it's low entry, right? Like, yes, you
Mhm.
need the equipment, but you can have almost like 3 games going on in one field
Yeah.
sideways, and you need 7 kids to have a team.
Yeah.
So that would be to me, and that's, here in Victoria, we started this too, is like that under 13, you almost have a group of friends that could start a team.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So if you have 7 kids to play, now you don't practice great with only 7. If you have 5-on-5, I understand that, but you don't need a whole lot of guys. So I
Yeah.
think that is a really good way to start the game on a young entry level. You don't need down markers. You
Yeah.
don't hardly need referees. Like, just have the coaches, referee on the side as well. Like,
Yeah.
keep it really simple and get more kids into the game.
Yeah, I guess that's post COVID, something that all clubs and all states are sort of trying to work on to try and make sure that we don't lose it. I know that there's a lot of clubs and states that are struggling with numbers and that sort of thing. But in South Australia, junior participation was at the highest it's ever been in the last year. So we had the most juniors registered ever. Again, some of those are the sort of 14, 15-year-olds in our under 19 program. But in terms of a bulk of numbers, if you can continue that sort of path and can continue growing more and more, that eventually you could make a split to have, a 15 or a 14s or a 16, a 15, under 15 competition, and then that under 19 competition, and just keep, even if, like you said, the under 15s is only 5-a-side tackle flag with a smaller field or something, just to get them involved, to get the clubs growing, to have people feeding in. Once you get someone into gridiron, like, you can find people that fall in love with it. It's a sport for everyone. People grow like we've talked about, the earlier you get into something, the earlier you find a love for it, and then you can continue growing and fostering through it. So I think all that is all being thought about, and it's just about, putting the steps in place to, maybe get into high school and primary schools and try to, sort of set up some sort of flag competition into school one. If we could get schools involved, that'd be one of the easiest ways to bring it together, is if you have school on school, take a bit of pride. People want to, play for their school gridiron team. It's not just their school AFL team, something like that, that then you could see, that could easily feed into clubs.
Yeah. A lot of times it takes, yeah, I don't want to make it an Elon Musk thing, but it takes a guy with an idea, right?
Oh yeah.
In Germany, in Düsseldorf, there's a coach started a football team in a high school, and they
Yep.
play in the regular competition with the
Yep.
juniors. So there's all kinds of ways that you can do it, right? So if you're a player and you're also a teacher, or whatever it is
Mm-hmm.
that you do on a school, and you're like, hey, let's start this,
Yeah.
it'd be awesome. Because look, if you look at the states where it's every 4 years, right? Whatever the the number of students in the school is, so sometimes you go up to 50,000, right? There's big
Oh
schools.
yeah.
They basically have 50,000 new fans every 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
So if you get into a school, every whatever years, there's a new cycle of kids coming through. And like you
Oh yeah.
said, they're playing for the school now as well, so um, there's a lot of ways you can look at these things to grow it, but it takes
Oh yeah.
a few people to put in a fair
Oh
bit of
yeah.
work.
Takes a few very committed people, very passionate people about growing the game, and I think that's sort of the next step, is to try and get these people, to invite them in, to really push them, and to go, hey, this is what we want. We see your dream or your idea, and we'd like to really make that a reality, so that maybe in 5-10 years time you have all the schools of South Australia playing a 5-on-5 flag competition for the best school in South Australia. Like, that would be unreal, for then going into, very low cost with just being flagged, to then go into, hey, come play for the under 19s junior tackle in an off season, and then from there into a club senior team, and then maybe, it'd be incredible to grow the sport from 4 clubs to 5, 2, 6. Like the thought of getting another team in the league is so foreign, I think, to everyone at the moment. But that's not to say that it can't, if we get on a good path.
Yeah. So do you prefer more teams, or do you prefer, the same amount of team or clubs, but maybe, a first team and a second team? What's your
Well,
thoughts on that?
that's sort of I think something that even the largest professional teams come up against with the AFL introducing a new team to Tasmania. Is there the quality in the teams that we've got at the moment to then spread it even thinner to another team? You see, I don't know if you follow AFL much, but you see West Coast, North Melbourne have very low losing records. Now, is that just a fact of they're going through their cycle of player development and drafting players and having young players and things like that? And this is a natural cycle that then warrants, it's perfectly fine to bring in another team into this cycle. Or is this a problem of, the talent Australia wide just not having quite enough to run with that top 1% or the really good teams? Or is it a coaching problem? Or is it, all these other factors? So I think that in South Australia, it'd be really good to see the level increase of the actual playing level. And then from there, if you did have too many people to go, okay, well, is it too many people because we need another team? Do you want to filter out that really good experience into others to try and have a larger, evenly spread team? Or do you have, your one division, your two division, depending on, where you're at? And maybe the one division and two division is better. If you have a large amount of rookies, having a second division where, they're not getting crushed by ex-college players and ex-Australia players and things like that is maybe a nicer way to bring people into the sport. But, until you have that volume at every club, it makes it really difficult, right?
I'll give you another problem you have. So you can grow your numbers. So let's say average club has 40 players, right? And you want to go to
Australia, they don't. So not
No,
in South
no.
Australia, they don't. No. Your average club might have 30 players in South
All right.
Australia.
Okay. In your case, 30, right? Makes my point even larger, I would say, is that then you grow, right? The number of offensive linemen and defensive linemen doesn't grow with the numbers. And again, like this, my math is not, quick enough to do that on the spot, but you'll grow and you will have 7 more DBs and wide receivers, and you haven't grown one offensive lineman or defensive lineman, or maybe one, right? So the competition at those skill positions might go up, but there is none competition, or there's not enough numbers to have 2 separate lines, or all kind of stuff. So there's a lot of different ways that you can look at growing. I like, you have growing and you have developing. And developing, I think, is the first key, that you develop the quality of the game before you grow it. There is not enough resources in terms of fields, practice fields, playing fields, referees, coaches, right? And that's all besides the players on the field. So if you have a real, like, those, they have 50 guys on the team, they practice and they compete, practice, and then you have higher quality. I think that's much better than you have, oh my God, look, we have grown 100%. Now we have 8 teams of the same quality. That I think that doesn't do it for me, I think, in terms of development.
And this is one of the big worries that I have with the flag football push, is that skilled position players have never been a struggle for any club, really, in the state of South Australia. At least I know for sure that you always have skilled position players. It's that offensive lineman and the defensive lineman that one you just like, they don't come, it doesn't stick, they don't enjoy it. There's some factor, and I worry that flag is going to exacerbate this problem even more. It can be tough for sure.
Yeah, so it's good. I haven't looked at it that way. Um, but to yeah, so and so the effort goes into growing those skill positions, right? If you put less effort into that, right? How would you solve the problem of not having enough big guys?
Well, I mean, this is the key problem, right? If I had a
Yeah,
solution to that,
yeah,
we'd have large gridiron programs everywhere around the country. But I think the hope is, and the hope that I would have is that, when you're in juniors and you're 16, 17, 18, you're definitely still growing. You're still maturing into, your frame, your body, things like that. That, someone could be, lineman shape and then end up not playing offensive line, and things like that. And then you could have the opposite way, if you have, a 14-year-old kid that played flag during their school for 3 or 4 years, and then they go away, life happens, and then they come back at 26 and they've had 2 kids and they've put on 100 kilos and they're ready to go. They want to, get back into shape or something. And then you're like, well, hey, do I have a spot for you? Here's left guard. Welcome. So, I think that it's that part of, it's this fine balance between, do you just try and expose the maximum amount of people and hope that, a few of them stick, and you get, you're probably going to get more skilled players like we talked about. But, if you can get two linemen with every 10 skilled players,
Mm.
that's sort of close, to what you need, because those two linemen are what we really need. They're the gold really out here. So
yeah, yeah. All right, Simon, let's wrap it up, man.
oh yeah,
I'm looking forward to continue this on the 20th of August in
oh yes,
person, because
yeah,
the idea is just to come down on the Saturday night and spend the whole Sunday there and
yep.
just do nothing but football the whole day.
I,
So
it sounds like we're getting back to the old days, right? Football for a whole day on a weekend. That sounds good to me.
that's it. I mean, what is better, huh? So,
Oh yeah.
all right. Thank you very much for your time as an economist today, and good wrapping up with football.
Nah, sounds good. Thanks for having me, and we'll talk again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, bud. See ya.
All right. See you.
Bye.
Bye.